Beatrice Holloway had always believed that after 35 years of marriage, the least she could expect from life was the loyalty of the man she had built it with. Instead, she received divorce papers in a manila envelope, a handwritten note from her husband telling her to be out by Friday, and the cruel, mocking laughter of a woman 22 years younger who was already measuring the curtains in her living room. Abandoned after 3.5 decades of devotion, stripped of her home, her savings, and every shred of dignity her children pretended she'd ever had, Beatrice walked out of that house with one small suitcase and a single yellowed envelope her mother had pressed in her hands 30 years earlier, whispering words Beatrice had dismissed as the sentimental ramblings of a dying woman. Her husband Franklin laughed when he saw her leave. Her grown children refused to meet her eyes. Her husband's young mistress waved from the porch like Beatrice was already a ghost. Little did any of them know that inside that forgotten envelope was a property deed to a place none of them had ever heard of, a homestead her mother Rosalind had hidden away for exactly this moment, and a truth so explosive it would reduce Franklin Holloway from a proud, triumphant man to a trembling, desperate shadow begging for mercy before the week was over. What Beatrice found on that forgotten land in Willowmere, Montana, wasn't just a house. It was evidence, it was vindication, and it was a weapon sharp enough to destroy the lies Franklin had built his entire second life upon. If you've ever been discarded after giving everything you had, if you've ever watched the person you trusted most throw you away like you were nothing, if you've ever wondered whether there's any justice left in this world for people who were taught their whole lives to be quiet and good and grateful, this story is for you. Stay with me until the end, because what Beatrice discovers on that Montana property will make you believe that no betrayal is ever the final chapter, and that sometimes the mothers who loved us knew exactly what we'd one day need to survive. Welcome to our channel, where we prove that truth waits patiently and justice finds its way home. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Beatrice Holloway stood in the kitchen of the house she had lived in for 31 of her 35 years of marriage, holding a manila envelope in hands that would not stop shaking. The envelope had been left on the granite countertop she had chosen herself 12 years ago, next to a half-full cup of coffee Franklin had abandoned when he'd walked out the front door that morning without saying goodbye. She had thought at the time that his silence was just his usual distraction, the preoccupation of a man whose mind was always halfway to the next business meeting. She hadn't known then that the silence was something else entirely. The silence was the sound of a man who had already left her and was simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up. The envelope was addressed to her in the careful, precise handwriting of Franklin's attorney, a man named Gordon Pierce whom Beatrice had known socially for almost 2 decades. Gordon had come to their Christmas parties. Gordon had sat at their dining room table and eaten the pot roast she had spent 6 hours preparing. Gordon had complimented her on her garden, had asked about her health when her mother Rosalind was dying, had held her hand at the funeral, and told her she was the kind of wife every man hoped to find. And now Gordon, that same Gordon, had drafted divorce papers that described her as the respondent and itemized her 35 years of marriage as though she were a line in a ledger being closed out. She opened the envelope slowly. She read the first page. She read it again because the words did not seem to be arranging themselves correctly in her mind. And then she sat down very carefully on one of the kitchen bar stools because her legs had stopped believing they could hold her up. Franklin was divorcing her. Franklin, whom she had married when she was 33 and he was 35, and they had both believed, with the earnest certainty of people who have not yet been disappointed, that they were going to build something that lasted. Franklin, whom she had nursed through a serious illness in his 40s and a brutal business downer in his 50s. Franklin, who had given a toast at their 30th anniversary dinner just 5 years ago and told the assembled guests that Beatrice was the smartest decision he had ever made. That Franklin was divorcing her, and according to the document in her hands, he had been planning it for the better part of 2 years. The assets list was the part that made her stomach drop. The house they lived in, the house where she had raised their 2 children, The house she had repainted 3 times and renovated twice and decorated and maintained and loved was listed as Franklin's separate property. The vacation condo in Arizona was listed as Franklin's separate property. Their investment accounts, the one she had helped build by working as a bookkeeper for 28 years before she'd retired at 61 to care for her dying mother, were listed as Franklin's separate property. Even the car she drove, the modest sedan she had chosen 3 years ago, because Franklin had said they needed to be careful with money, was titled in his name alone. How had this happened? She had signed things over the years. Every married person signed things. Tax documents, refinancing papers, investment transfers. Franklin had always brought them to her with the same casual confidence, always said the same thing. Just a formality, B. Sign here. I'll explain it later. And she had signed because that was what a trusting wife did, because Franklin had a finance degree and she had trusted his judgment, because in 35 years of marriage, she had never once imagined that the man she had chosen would spend years quietly, methodically stripping her name off every asset they had built together. The hot, animal sound that came out of her then was not a sob. It was something older and rawer, the noise of a woman realizing she had been robbed in slow motion over the course of decades by the only man she had ever fully trusted. "Oh," Camille said when she saw Beatrice. She did not look surprised. She looked mildly inconvenienced, the way a person might look upon discovering that a piece of furniture they intended to move was heavier than expected. "I thought you'd be gone by now." Franklin came in behind her. He was wearing the charcoal, gray sweater Beatrice had given him last Christmas. He looked at her, his wife of 35 years, sitting at the kitchen counter holding the papers that ended their marriage, and his expression shifted through several stages before settling on something that looked horrifyingly like impatience. B said, "I thought we agreed you'd be out by Friday." "It's Tuesday, Franklin. I know what day it is. I'm asking why you're still here." She looked at him. She looked at the woman in the cream sweater who was now opening the refrigerator as though it belonged to her. She looked at the man she had loved since she was 33 years old, and she understood, with a clarity that felt almost holy, that the Franklin she had believed in had either never existed or had died sometime in the past few years without her noticing. "I got the papers an hour ago, Franklin. And I need time. I need to find somewhere to go. I need to—" "You've had time," he interrupted. "You've had months. You knew this was coming." "I did not know this was coming." He sighed, the sigh of a patient man dealing with a slow child. "B, come on. You had to know." She had not known. She had suspected, in the vague, dismissible way that long-married women sometimes suspected things, that Franklin had been distracted, short-tempered, working late more often, buying new cologne. She had chalked it up to the stress of his business, to the approach of his 70th birthday, to the general restlessness of a man with too much money and too few problems. She had not known about Camille. She had not known about the systematic transfer of assets. She had not known that the house she was sitting in had stopped being her home sometime in the previous fiscal year, and she had simply not been informed. "Where am I supposed to go, Franklin?" He shrugged. It was the shrug that broke her. A small, careless gesture from the man who had promised, in front of God and 180 witnesses, to cherish her until death. "You have a sister in Portland," he said. "Go stay with her for a while. Figure it out." Beatrice stared at her. Then she stared at Franklin, waiting for him to correct the younger woman, to defend his wife, to show even the smallest flicker of the decency she had believed, for 35 years, to be the bedrock of his character. Franklin looked at the floor. Franklin said nothing, and in that silence, Beatrice Holloway finally understood that she was completely, catastrophically alone. Beatrice did not cry in front of them. She would remember that later, when the nights in the Pemberton guest room grew long and her mind replayed every detail of that afternoon with merciless precision. She did not cry. She stood up from the bar stool with the slow, deliberate care of a woman who understood that her body was the only thing she had left that she could still control, and she walked past Franklin and Camille without saying another word. She climbed the stairs to the bedroom she had shared with Franklin for 31 years, and she pulled down from the top shelf of the closet the small tan suitcase she had bought for their honeymoon to Maine in the summer of 1991. She packed it in 14 minutes. She did not pack clothes worth keeping. She did not pack the pearl earrings Franklin had given her for their 25th anniversary, because she understood now, with a terrible, clean certainty, that everything Franklin had given her had been bought with money he had been quietly planning to reclaim. She packed 3 changes of clothes. She packed her late mother's Bible, which she kept in the drawer of her nightstand. She packed the framed photograph of her parents on the day they opened their first hardware store in 1962. She packed her reading glasses and her blood pressure medication and the small wooden box her father Everett had carved for her 8th birthday. And at the very bottom of the drawer, underneath a stack of anniversary cards she no longer had any reason to keep, she found the envelope her mother had pressed in her hands a day before she died. Beatrice had not thought about that envelope in years. Rosalind Fairchild had given it to her on a cold March afternoon 30 years ago, when the cancer had finally made its way into her bones and she had known she was running out of time. Beatrice had been sitting beside her mother's hospital bed, holding her hand, trying not to cry because Rosalind had always hated tears. Her mother had reached under her pillow with tremendous effort and pulled out the envelope, sealed and yellowed even then, and pressed it into Beatrice's palm with fingers that were already more bone than flesh. "Put this somewhere safe, Beatrice. Don't open it. Don't show it to Franklin. Don't show it to anyone. But keep it. Promise me you'll keep it." "Mama, what is it?" "It's a door, sweetheart. A door for a day I hope you never see. If the day ever comes when you have nothing left, when the people you trusted have taken everything, when you cannot imagine what you're supposed to do next, you open this envelope. Not before. You understand me? Not before. Because if you open it too soon, he'll find a way to take this too." Beatrice had thought, at the time, that her mother was confused. Rosalind had been on heavy pain medication. Her mind had drifted in and out those last weeks, and she had said many things that did not seem to connect to the world as Beatrice understood it. But Rosalind had gripped her hand hard, harder than a dying woman should have been able to, and she had looked into Beatrice's eyes with a lucidity that had startled her. "Franklin is not what he appears to be, Beatrice. I have known it for years. I did not tell you because you loved him, and I had no proof, only a mother's knowing. But I prepared for you anyway, because that is what mothers do. Promise me." Beatrice had promised, and then, like so many promises made to dying people, she had tucked the envelope away and let herself forget about it, because her mother was gone within 36 hours and the weight of that grief had made everything else seem small and unimportant. She had moved the envelope from drawer to drawer over the years, each time a little less certain why she was bothering to keep it. Once, about 10 years ago, she had almost thrown it away during a spring cleaning. Something had stopped her. She did not know what. Now, standing in the bedroom of the house that was no longer hers, holding that yellowed envelope in hands that were shaking from more than grief, Beatrice understood that her mother had not been confused. Her mother had been correct. Her mother had known, 30 years ago, what Beatrice had refused to allow herself to see until an hour ago in the kitchen downstairs. She did not open the envelope. Not yet. Some instinct, some inherited caution from the woman who had carved that warning into the last conscious hours of her life, told Beatrice that opening it in this house, under this roof, with Franklin and Camille laughing in the kitchen below, would be exactly the mistake her mother had spent her dying breath trying to prevent. She slid the envelope into the inner lining of her purse, where she had once carried photographs of her children when they were small, and she zipped her suitcase closed. She walked down the stairs with her suitcase in one hand and her purse in the other. Franklin and Camille were in the living room now, and they had opened a bottle of the good wine, the Malbec Franklin had been saving for his 70th birthday next month. They did not stop their conversation when she came down the stairs. They did not offer to help with her suitcase. Camille glanced up, registered her presence the way one might register a delivery driver leaving a package, and returned to whatever she had been saying about paint colors for the master bathroom. Beatrice stopped at the front door and turned around. She did not know why she turned. Perhaps she had wanted, despite everything, to give Franklin one last chance to be the man she had believed he was. Perhaps she had wanted to see if he would stand up, walk over, say something human. Perhaps she had simply needed to fix this scene in her memory so that she would never again be tempted to wonder if she had imagined his cruelty. Franklin looked up from the couch. His eyes met hers, and for a fraction of a second, something flickered across his face that might have been shame, or might have been regret, or might have been the simple discomfort of a man who did not enjoy being watched while he behaved badly. Then Camille laughed at something on her phone, and Franklin turned toward her, and the moment was gone. "Goodbye, Franklin," Beatrice said. He did not answer. He did not look at her again. Camille waved one manicured hand in her general direction without looking up from her screen, the way a queen might dismiss a servant from a room she no longer required them in. Beatrice walked out of the house where she had raised 2 children and buried a mother and built what she had believed to be a life. She closed the heavy oak door behind her. She did not slam it. She did not look back. She walked down the flagstone path she had laid herself one summer when Franklin had been away on a business trip, and she loaded her single suitcase into the back of the modest sedan she had just learned did not belong to her, and she drove away from 35 years of her own life at the steady, careful speed of a woman who was not yet ready to fall apart. She drove to a diner on the edge of Ashbourne, one of those roadside places with vinyl booths and laminated menus that had not changed since 1987. She ordered black coffee and a slice of apple pie she had no intention of eating. She sat in the booth by the window, and she finally allowed herself to pull the envelope out of her purse. Her hands were steadier now. Something about having left the house, having placed physical distance between herself and Franklin, had given her back a small portion of the self-possession she had spent 35 years cultivating. She examined the envelope in the fluorescent light of the diner. It was sealed with a thick red wax seal, and pressed into the wax was a small, ornate impression she had not noticed before. The letter F. Not for Franklin. For Fairchild. Her mother's maiden name, her own maiden name before she had given it up for a man who had turned out not to deserve it. Beatrice broke the seal with the edge of her butter knife. Inside the envelope were 3 items. The first was a folded document on heavy, official-looking paper, slightly yellowed with age, but otherwise perfectly preserved. She unfolded it carefully. It was a property deed. The property was described as the Fairchild homestead, comprising 47 acres of improved land with primary residence, outbuildings, and water rights, located at 14 Silverbrook Lane, Willowmere, Carbon County, Montana. The deed was dated April 12, 1976. The named owner of the property was Rosalind Fairchild, sole and separate. There was a notation at the bottom of the deed, stamped by the Carbon County Recorder's Office, indicating that the property had been held continuously in the Fairchild name since the original homestead patent was granted in 1891. Beatrice stared at it. Willowmere, Montana. She had never heard of Willowmere, Montana. Her mother had grown up in Oregon. Her father had grown up in Washington. Neither of her parents had ever, in all the years Beatrice had known them, mentioned owning property in Montana. The second item was a letter written in her mother's distinctive, sloping handwriting. The ink had faded slightly, but was still perfectly legible. The date at the top was February 18, 1996, which meant Rosalind had written it roughly 3 weeks before her death. My beloved Beatrice, if you're reading this, then the day I hoped would never come has come. I am so sorry, sweetheart. I am sorry for what you have endured to arrive at this page, and I am sorry that I could not save you from it while I was still alive. A mother's love, it turns out, has its limits. We cannot stop the storms. We can only prepare you for them as best we can. The property described in the enclosed deed has been in our family for 5 generations. My grandfather, Amos Fairchild, built the original cabin with his own hands in 1891. My father was born there, and I was born there, and I would have raised you there except that your father and I made a different choice when we moved to Oregon to open the store. The homestead has been held in trust, quietly maintained, and never transferred out of the Fairchild name. It is not listed in any public records associated with me as your mother, because I used my maiden name on every document, and your father agreed, and the legal work was done through a firm in Montana that specializes in exactly this kind of discretion. Franklin does not know this property exists, Beatrice. He has never known. I made your father swear to me, and I am asking you now to understand why. From the moment I met that man, I felt something was wrong with him. I could not name it. I had no evidence, but I have lived long enough to trust the quiet signals a woman's body gives her about the people she is meant to fear, and Franklin set off every one of them. I did not tell you because I did not want to be the mother who poisoned her daughter against the man she loved. That is a sin I have watched other women commit, and I refused to be one of them. So I stayed silent, and I watched, and I prepared. The homestead is yours, Beatrice. It has been legally yours since the day I signed the deed over to a revocable trust with you as the sole beneficiary, which was the day I first suspected Franklin was stealing from you. That was 1994. He does not know. His attorneys do not know. No court in any state can touch it because it was never part of your marital estate. It was my gift to you, prepared in silence and held in reserve for exactly this moment. Go there, Beatrice. Go to Willamir. The caretakers are a couple named Winston and Delphine Pemberton. They have maintained the property for the last 22 years under my standing instructions. They know to expect you. They will recognize your name. Winston has the key to the main house, and he has something else for you as well, something I could not put in this envelope for fear it would be discovered before the right time. Ask him for the second letter. He will know what you mean. One more thing, my darling girl. What you will find on that property is not only a refuge, it is also a reckoning. I gathered evidence over the years, Beatrice. Evidence about Franklin, about the accounts he moved, about the people he deceived, about the woman he has been hiding for longer than you can possibly imagine. I did not show it to you because I wanted you to have the years of love you believed you had. But I preserved it, and I placed it there, and when you are ready, you will use it. You are always stronger than you knew. You just needed a mother who understood that the world would one day demand that strength from you. Your mother who loves you beyond the grave. Rosalind Fairchild. Beatrice lowered the letter onto the Formica tabletop and pressed both her hands flat against it, as though the paper might float away if she did not hold it down. The waitress, a tired-looking woman in her 50s with a kind face, drifted over with the coffee pot and took one look at Beatrice before setting the pot down and sliding into the booth across from her without being invited. "Honey," the waitress said, "you don't have to tell me anything, but you look like a woman who just got handed something heavy. You need a minute, you take it. Coffee's on the house." Beatrice nodded. She could not trust her voice. The waitress patted her hand once, gently, and slid back out of the booth. Beatrice sat in the silence she had been given, and she picked up the third and final item from the envelope. It was a small brass key on a tarnished silver chain, identical in style to the one her mother had worn around her neck every day of her adult life. Beatrice had assumed, when Rosalind died, that she had been buried with it. Apparently not. Apparently her mother had taken it off in secret, exactly the way many careful women did when they understood that some things were too important to be buried with the dead. Beatrice put the key around her own neck. It sat against her breastbone with a small, cold weight that felt absurdly like the first honest embrace she had received in months. She paid for the coffee. She left the waitress a $20 tip, which was nearly all the cash she had in her wallet, because kindness from strangers was not something she could take for granted anymore. She walked back out to the sedan Franklin had bought in his own name, and she considered for a long moment whether she was legally entitled to drive it anywhere at all. Then she decided she did not care. Let him call the police. Let him try to explain to the officers why his wife of 35 years was driving a car he had tricked her into signing away. She got in, turned the ignition, and pulled out of the diner parking lot onto the state highway that would eventually, with many hours of driving, carry her east out of Oregon, through Idaho, and into the Montana Valley where her mother had been born and where apparently Beatrice now owned 47 acres of land and a house she had never seen. The drive took her 11 hours. She slept for 4 of them in a rest area outside Missoula, reclining the driver's seat and wrapping herself in the old cardigan she had grabbed from the closet on her way out of the house. She woke at dawn with a crick in her neck and the strange, unfamiliar sensation of having no one in the world who would notice if she did not arrive anywhere by any particular time. Willowmere, Montana, was a town of just under 800 people tucked into a valley between 2 low ranges of pine-covered mountains. Beatrice drove through the single main street slowly, taking in the feed store and the small post office and the diner with a hand-painted sign reading Abby's counter. She stopped at a gas station to ask directions to Silverbrook Lane. The woman behind the counter, a broad-shouldered woman in her 60s wearing a flannel shirt and a name tag that read Louise, studied Beatrice's face for a long moment before answering. "You looking for the Fairchild place?" Beatrice's breath caught in her throat. "Yes." "How did you know?" Louise smiled, a slow smile that creased the corners of her eyes. "You got her face, honey. Rosalind's face. I went to grade school with your mama. I wondered if this day would ever come." Beatrice did not know what to say. Her mother had been gone for 30 years, and here, in this tiny town she had never set foot in before, a stranger had recognized her at a glance. "Silverbrook Lane," Louise continued, already drawing a small map on the back of a receipt. 3 miles east, then a left at the old fence post with the red paint on it. You'll see the gate. Winston and Delphine live in the small house near the road. Main house is back up the hill. Winston's expecting you, I'd wager. He's been expecting you for a long time." Beatrice thanked her and walked out of the station with legs that felt, for the first time since Tuesday afternoon, like they belonged to her again. She found a gate exactly where Louise had said it would be. A wrought iron gate between 2 stone pillars, with the word Fairchild worked into the metalwork in letters so patinated by time they were nearly black. The gate was closed, but not locked. Beatrice got out of the car, pushed the gate open with both hands, drove through, and then got out again to close it behind her the way her father had always taught her to close a gate on someone else's property. She was smiling, very faintly, when she realized this was not someone else's property. This was hers. The Pemberton house was a small, white clapboard cottage set about 100 yards in from the gate, with a wraparound porch and a riot of late-season roses climbing the trellis by the front door. Beatrice had barely pulled to a stop when the front door opened and an elderly man in a canvas work coat stepped out onto the porch. He was tall and lean, with a weathered face and a full head of white hair, and he was already walking toward her car with the long, easy stride of a man who had worked outdoors his entire life. "Mrs. Holloway," he said as she opened her door. Then he paused, and a small, embarrassed look crossed his face. "Or Ms. Fairchild, if you'd prefer. Your mother always asked me to call you Miss Fairchild when you came." Beatrice swallowed. "Fairchild is fine." "That's fine, Mr. Pemberton." "Winston, please." "Winston. I'm Beatrice." He nodded, and something in his eyes told her that he had known her name for 22 years and had been waiting patiently for the day he would finally get to use it in her presence. He held out a hand. She took it. His grip was firm and dry and calloused. "Your mother was one of the finest women I've ever known," Winston said quietly. "I was honored to do this work for her. Delphine has the kettle on. Come inside and meet her, and then I'll take you up to the main house." Delphine Pemberton was a small, round-faced woman in her late 70s with silver hair pinned up in a neat bun and a smile that made Beatrice, who had not been smiled at with uncomplicated warmth in longer than she could remember, almost burst into tears on the threshold. Delphine did not ask questions. Delphine simply pressed a cup of strong black tea in her hands and settled her into a rocking chair by the wood stove and said, "We've waited a long time to meet you, dear. Take your time." Beatrice drank the tea. She let herself sit in the quiet for 10 full minutes. Then she set the cup down and looked at Winston, who was sitting across from her in an identical rocking chair, waiting with the infinite patience of a man who understood that some arrivals could not be rushed. "My mother said you had a letter for me," Beatrice said. "A second letter." Winston nodded slowly. He stood up, walked to a small cabinet beside the wood stove, and unlocked it with a key he wore around his neck on a leather cord. From inside the cabinet, Winston withdrew a thick, padded envelope that had clearly been sitting undisturbed for decades. He carried it across the room with the careful, two-handed grip of a man who understood he was holding something irreplaceable, and he placed it in Beatrice's lap without ceremony. "Your mother brought this to us in the spring of 1995, he said, lowering himself back into his rocking chair. "She drove out here alone. She stayed 3 days. She walked the whole property with me, every acre, and she told me things about your husband that I pray to God I will never have to repeat out loud. She gave me this envelope, and she made me swear on my own mother's grave that I would not open it, would not move it, would not speak of it to anyone, until the day you arrived at our door and asked for it by name. And so here it is, Beatrice. 22 years it has waited for you. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Beatrice held the envelope in her hands for a long moment before opening it. Delphine, sensing that this was not a moment to be witnessed, quietly excused herself to tend to something in the kitchen. Winston remained where he was, not watching her exactly, but present, the way a good man remains present when a woman is about to receive news she will need a witness to survive. Beatrice broke the seal. Inside were dozens of documents, bank statements, property records, photographs, handwritten notes in her mother's careful script, a small leather-bound ledger, and on top of everything, a second letter addressed simply to my Beatrice, when you're ready to know. She read the letter first. My darling, if you have come this far, then Winston has given you the envelope, and you have already survived the worst of what Franklin has done to you. I am proud of you. I need you to know that. Whatever you believe right now about yourself, whatever he made you feel over all those years, you were never the fool he wanted you to think you were. You were a good woman who loved a bad man, and that is not a character flaw. That is the price we sometimes pay for having hearts that are willing to trust. What you hold in your hands now is the evidence I gathered during the last 10 years of my life. I cannot confront Franklin directly. He was too powerful, too connected, too capable of making an old woman's accusations disappear. So instead I watched, and I documented, and I saved everything, knowing that one day you would need proof rather than my word. Camille Whitaker is not a new development, Beatrice. Franklin has been involved with her for 17 years. She was 26 when it began. I know because I hired a private investigator in 1999 when I first noticed the pattern of his absences and the unaccounted withdrawals from your joint accounts. The reports from that investigator are in this envelope. There are photographs. There are hotel receipts. There are the names of 3 other women who preceded Camille, 2 of whom received substantial cash settlements to remain quiet. The financial fraud is more extensive than the infidelity. Franklin has been systematically diverting marital assets into shell corporations and offshore accounts since approximately 1993. I do not know the full extent. I know enough. The ledger in this envelope contains account numbers, transfer dates, and the names of the attorneys and accountants who help him do it, all of which my investigator was able to document over a 6-year period. Use this carefully, my darling. You are not a woman who craves revenge. I know that. I raised you. But justice is not the same as revenge, and you are owed justice. Take this to a good attorney. Not anyone connected to Franklin's world. There's a card in the envelope for a woman named Corinne Alderman in Bozeman. She was a friend of mine once, many years ago, and she is the finest attorney I have ever met. She knows your name. She knows to expect you. She has been waiting, the way Winston has been waiting, the way I waited all those years in silence for the day you would finally be ready to fight back. I love you, Beatrice, more than you can measure. I am sorry I could not be there to hold your hand through this. But I was there in every minute of the preparation, and I am there now, and I will be there when you stand up and reclaim what is yours. Mama, Beatrice lowered the letter. Her vision had blurred, and she realized with distant surprise that she was crying, silent tears running freely down her face onto the papers in her lap. Winston handed her a clean white handkerchief without comment. She took it, pressed it to her eyes, and when she lowered it again, something inside her had shifted. 17 years. Camille had been in Franklin's life for 17 years. 17 years meant that Camille had been Franklin's mistress while Beatrice was nursing him through his gallbladder surgery. Camille had been Franklin's mistress while Beatrice was helping their daughter Natalie plan her wedding. Camille had been Franklin's mistress while Beatrice was sitting vigil at Rosalind's hospital bed, while Beatrice was clearing out her mother's house in Oregon, while Beatrice was burying both her parents and grieving in a bedroom where Franklin, it turned out, had been lying next to her at night and thinking of someone else. 3 other women before Camille. 2 settlements. The rage that rose up in Beatrice then was not the hot, blind rage of a woman newly wounded. It was something colder, something that felt, strangely, like the first clear-headedness she had experienced in decades. She had spent 35 years making herself smaller to accommodate Franklin's moods, smaller to fit inside the life he had designed, smaller so that she would not be perceived as difficult or demanding or ungrateful. And now, sitting in a stranger's rocking chair in a Montana cottage she had never known existed, with her mother's evidence in her lap and her mother's key around her neck, Beatrice Holloway felt herself expand for the first time since her wedding day. She looked up at Winston. He was watching her with the steady gaze of a man who had waited a long time to see this exact expression on this exact face. "Would you show me the main house now, please, Winston?" He smiled. It was a small, quiet smile, but there was real joy in it. "Yes, Miss Fairchild. I would be honored to." The main house sat at the top of a gentle rise about a quarter-mile from the Pemberton cottage, at the end of a gravel drive that curved through a stand of old-growth pines. It was a two-story farmhouse of painted white clapboard, with a wide front porch and green shutters and a stone chimney that rose from the center of the roof like a spine. Late autumn roses climbed the porch railings. A pair of ancient oak trees flanked the front walk, their leaves just beginning to turn the deep red gold of the Montana fall. Beatrice stopped at the base of the porch steps and simply looked at it. "My mother was born here," she said quietly. "Yes, ma'am. In the upstairs bedroom on the east side. She showed me the exact spot when she came out in '95. She wanted me to know the history of every room. She said the house would tell it to you, too, if you listened." Winston handed her the key. It was a heavy, old-fashioned iron key, the kind that had gone out of common use decades ago. Beatrice fit it into the lock of the front door, turned it, and pushed the door open. The house was not what she had expected. She had braced herself for dust sheets and cobwebs and the stale, closed-up smell of a place abandoned. Instead, the air inside was clean and faintly fragrant with beeswax and cedar. The floors gleamed. The windows were spotless. A small fire was already laid in the parlor fireplace, waiting only for a match. Fresh flowers, late blooming asters from what must have been Delphine's garden, sat in a cut-glass vase on the entry table. "Delphine and I come up once a week," Winston said from behind her on the porch. "Your mother left standing instructions. The house was to be kept ready. She wrote her letter to us that she wanted you to walk in and feel welcome, not like a stranger inheriting a mausoleum." Beatrice walked through the rooms slowly. The parlor with its stone fireplace and its low, comfortable furniture. The dining room with its long oak table that had been in the Fairchild family since the 1880s. The kitchen, which had been modernized at some point but still retained the original soapstone sink where her great-grandmother had washed dishes in 1895. She climbed the narrow wooden staircase to the second floor. She found a bedroom on the east side where her mother had been born. She found a small study at the end of the hall where a roll-top desk held a single framed photograph of Rosalind and Beatrice, taken when Beatrice was perhaps 4 years old, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. She sat down in the chair at the desk. She pulled the photograph toward her with one hand, and she whispered to her mother and to the house and to the generations of Fairchild women who had stood in this room before her. "I'm home, Mama. I made it. I'm home." She slept that night in the upstairs bedroom, under a quilt Delphine had stitched from scraps of Rosalind's own dresses. She slept for 11 hours without moving. She woke to the sound of meadowlarks and the smell of wood smoke drifting up from the Pemberton chimney, and for the first morning in longer than she could remember, she did not wake up afraid. She spent the next 3 days reading every document her mother had gathered, organizing them into categories, making detailed notes. She called Corinne Alderman on the morning of the 4th day. Corinne Alderman answered her own phone. She was 71 years old, Rosalind's age exactly, and when Beatrice identified herself, there was a long pause on the other end of the line before Corinne said, in a voice that sounded suspiciously thick, Rosalind's daughter, "I have been waiting for your call for 22 years. Come to Bozeman tomorrow morning. I will clear my entire day." Beatrice drove the 2 hours to Bozeman with the envelope of evidence on the passenger seat beside her. Corinne Alderman's office occupied the entire top floor of a restored brick building on Main Street. And Corinne herself turned out to be a tall, silver-haired woman in a charcoal suit who hugged Beatrice at the door and then sat down across from her at a conference table and did not waste a single minute on pleasantries. "Your mother retained me in 1995, Corinne said. She paid me a very substantial advance, and she instructed me to hold myself ready for whenever you arrived. That retainer has been earning interest for 2 decades. We have a war chest, Beatrice, a significant one. Now walk me through everything, and we will build you a case that your husband will not recover from." It took 3 weeks to assemble it all. Corinne worked with forensic accountants who traced Franklin's financial fraud across 18 shell companies and 4 offshore jurisdictions. Corinne's private investigator located 2 of the 3 women who had preceded Camille and secured sworn statements from both. Corinne filed a countersuit in Oregon that alleged marital fraud, concealment of assets, breach of fiduciary duty, and sought to void every document Beatrice had signed under false pretenses over the entire 35 years of the marriage. Franklin's attorneys tried to stall. Corinne did not allow it. Corinne had spent 22 years preparing for this case, and she moved with the surgical precision of a woman who had rehearsed every step. Within 6 weeks, Franklin's principal shell company was frozen by a Montana court order. Within 10 weeks, the IRS had opened a parallel investigation based on documents Corinne had legally provided. Within 12 weeks, Franklin's attorney Gordon Pierce withdrew from the case, citing irreconcilable conflicts, which everyone understood to mean that Gordon had realized he was about to be named in the fraud himself and wanted daylight between his practice and his former client. Franklin called Beatrice for the first time on a Tuesday morning in late November. She was sitting on the porch of the farmhouse drinking coffee, watching the first snow of the season drift down onto the pines. She almost did not answer. She answered anyway, because she wanted to hear his voice one more time, the way a person sometimes wants to look at a scar to remind themselves of how far they have healed. "B. Franklin, B, please. We need to talk. This has gotten out of hand. I don't know what you think you've found, but we can resolve this. We can sit down like reasonable people and Franklin, and work something out. I know I handled the separation badly. I was under a lot of pressure. I was not myself. Camille has been a terrible influence, and I see that now, and I am prepared to—" "Franklin, stop." There was a silence on the line. She could hear him breathing. "I know about Camille. I know about the 17 years. I know about Rebecca. I know about Lisa. I know about Margaret and the settlement you paid her in 2004. I know about the shell companies. I know about the account in the Cayman Islands. I know about the $2.3 million you moved into the Liechtenstein Trust in 2019. I know all of it, Franklin. My mother knew almost all of it before I did. The rest my attorney found in the last 12 weeks. You're not calling me to negotiate. You're calling me to beg. And the answer is no." She hung up. She did not cry. She finished her coffee and watched the snow and felt, not triumph exactly, but something quieter and more enduring. The feeling of a woman who had finally stopped apologizing for taking up space in her own life. The settlement was finalized in March. Beatrice received the Ashbourne house, which she immediately sold. She received a lump sum equal to half of all the assets Franklin had concealed, plus damages, plus attorney's fees. She received full title to the Arizona condo. She received the car. Franklin received public disgrace, a federal indictment for tax fraud, and a separation agreement from Camille Whitaker, who had abandoned him within 2 weeks of the asset freeze, because it turned out, as Beatrice's mother had suggested in one of her final letters, that some women's love was remarkably sensitive to liquidity. Her children came to her in April, Natalie and Jonathan, both of them in tears, both of them apologizing for having believed their father's version of the separation. Beatrice received them kindly, because she was her mother's daughter and cruelty had never been her nature, but she did not pretend that forgiveness was instant. She told them what she had told Corinne on that first day in Bozeman. "I'm still here. I'm still your mother. But I'm not the same woman you left behind in Ashbourne, and I will not be pretending to be her. If you want a relationship with me going forward, it will be with a woman I actually am." Spring came to Willamir slowly that year. The snow melted off the high pastures in late April, and by early May the meadow below the farmhouse was carpeted in wild lupin and Indian paintbrush. Beatrice planted a vegetable garden in the small plot behind the kitchen where her great-grandmother had planted one in 1893. She learned from Delphine how to can tomatoes, how to render lard for pastry, how to tell a good laying hen from a poor one. She bought 6 chickens. She named them after women she had admired in her life. The one she named Rosalind was the best layer of the flock, which made her smile every morning when she collected the eggs. She did not rush anything. She had spent 35 years rushing, trying to be whatever the day demanded of her, and she had decided, quite deliberately, that the rest of her life would move at the pace her own body set. She walked the property in the mornings. She read in the afternoons. She wrote long letters in the evenings to Hazel Brennan, her mother's old friend in Oregon, who had written to her in January to say that Rosalind had confided many things to her over the years, and that if Beatrice ever wanted to hear stories about her mother as a young woman, Hazel was waiting. Natalie came in June. She came alone, without her husband, without her children, and she stayed for 4 days in the guest room at the end of the upstairs hall. She and Beatrice did not resolve everything. Some things were too deep to be resolved in 4 days. But on the last evening, sitting on the porch with glasses of iced tea, Natalie said quietly, "I didn't know you had a mother who loved you this much. I didn't know any of this existed. I'm sorry I didn't try harder to know who you were, Mom. I think I believed Dad's version of you because it was easier than looking at my own." Beatrice reached across the small table between them and took her daughter's hand. "Your grandmother left me something, Natalie. She left me a whole second life. When you're ready, I'd like to show you where you come from. The real where. Not the version your father told you." Natalie cried. Beatrice did not. Beatrice had done her crying in an Oregon diner booth and in a rocking chair in a Montana cottage, and her tears now were reserved for joy. Jonathan came in August with his wife and their little boy, Beatrice's youngest grandchild, a 4-year-old named Oliver with his grandfather's eyes and none of his grandfather's coldness. Beatrice took Oliver out to the hen house on his first morning and lifted him up to see the eggs nestled in the straw. She told him the hens were named after brave women. She told him the best one was named Rosalind, after his great-grandmother. Oliver asked, with the grave seriousness of very small children, whether Rosalind the hen would like to meet him. Beatrice said she suspected she would. She framed her mother's letter. Both of them, the first and the second, matted side by side in a heavy walnut frame with archival glass. She hung the frame above the roll-top desk in the small upstairs study, where she could see it every morning when she came in to write or to pay the farm's bills, or simply to sit for a moment with the photograph of her 4-year-old self laughing in her mother's arms. She did not frame the property deed. The property deed she kept folded in the drawer of the desk, inside an envelope marked, in her own hand this time, for my daughter Natalie, when the day comes. Keep this. Don't open it. Don't show it to anyone. But keep it. Promise me you'll keep it. She understood now why her mother had written those words 30 years ago. It was not paranoia. It was not dramatics. It was a mother at the end of her life doing the only thing a mother could still do for a daughter she would not be alive to protect. Beatrice intended to do the same. She did not know what storm might one day come for Natalie. She prayed there would be none, but she would not leave her daughter unprepared, as she had been, and she would not leave her granddaughter unprepared, and she would not leave any Fairchild woman unprepared for as many generations as the envelope could be passed forward. That, she understood now, was what it meant to be loved by your mother. Not only to be held while she was alive, but to be protected after she was gone, in ways you could not see until the day you needed them. She stood on her porch in the last golden light of a September evening, 1 year to the day since she had walked out of the house in Ashbourne with a tan suitcase in her hand, and she watched the sun set over the mountains her great-grandfather had homesteaded 133 years ago. The meadowlarks called from the meadow. The chickens settled in the hen house. Somewhere up the road, Delphine was ringing the small dinner bell that meant Winston should come home. Beatrice Holloway smiled. She went inside. "I'm grateful beyond words that you stayed with Beatrice Holloway from the moment she received those divorce papers on a Tuesday afternoon in Ashbourne, all the way to the evening she stood on her own porch on her own land, under her own sky. If her story moves something in you, if you have ever given 35 years of your life to someone who threw them back at you like they were nothing, if you have ever believed the worst lies about yourself simply because the person telling them shared your last name, leave one word in the comments telling us what you would build if life handed you a second chance the way it handed one to Beatrice. Because her story proves something that this world does not want us to remember. That mothers love us in ways that outlast them. That the quiet, careful women who came before us saw more than we knew, prepared more than we realized, and protected us in ways we do not discover until the day we finally need them. That a woman who has lost everything is not a woman who has nothing. She is a woman who is about to find out what she is truly made of. Share this story with someone who has ever been discarded, ever been made small, ever been told by the person they loved most that 35 years of devotion was a debt that could be erased with a manila envelope and a cold goodbye. Because together we prove that no betrayal is final, that no homestead stays forgotten forever, and that the keys our mothers leave us, whether they are made of brass or of words or of the quiet evidence gathered in silence over decades, will always fit the locks we need them to open. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.